Welcome everyone to this evening's BMS talk. I'll introduce our chair, and that's Helen Baker. Helen is an amateur mycologist and a committee member of the Grampian Fungus Group, where she leads on fungal sequencing. And she's also a member of the BMS Field Mycology and Conservation Committee. So thank you very much, Helen. Over to you.
Thanks, Sally. Hello, everyone. Good evening. Welcome to this BMS talk, and just one domestic before we get started. If you'd like to ask questions as we go, you can use the chat function, which you should find at the bottom in the middle of your screen. Pop in questions at any time. You don't have to wait till the end, but we won't address the questions until Lukas has finished talking. But please do get your questions in there. I'd like to introduce Lukas Large, who's our speaker this evening. Lukas is based in the West Midlands, which you might gather from the title of the talk. Lukas is curator of natural science with the Birmingham Museums Trust, and he's previously worked for the Lost and Found Fungus Project for the Royal Botanic Gardens in Kew, and he is the founder and chair of the West Midlands Fungus Group, and that's what we're going to hear all about tonight. So without any further ado, over to you, Lukas.
Thanks, Helen. Okay, so I'm going to have a little talk about finding fungi in the West Midlands. So I'll start with a little bit of context for people who might not be familiar with the area. The West Midlands is pretty much in the middle of the landmass of Britain, landlocked area. It's formed from parts of 3 of the traditional vice counties. So that includes Staffordshire to the north, Warwickshire to the east, and Worcestershire to the sort of south and west. It's an extremely urban part of the country, and has this is a map of the population density, and you can see that most of the area is inhabited by people. There are relatively small areas of green space, and even those areas of green space that do exist were often former industrial sites like quarries and factories until fairly recently. So I'll start by looking at some of the history of fungi in the West Midlands. As far as I can work out, this is the earliest fungus record in the region, and this was made by this fancy fellow called Robert Plott. He was the curator of the first curator of the Ashmolean Museum in Oxford. But he also wrote several books on natural history, such as, and the relevant one here is the Natural History of Staffordshire, which was published in 1686. And if you look at this illustration of fungi, you can see the unmistakable shape of the stinkhorn that he found roughly halfway between Wolverhampton and Walsall. So people have been finding fungi in the region since at least the 1680s. So there are some really old records going back. Then we move on to Dr. William Withering. He's best known today for his contributions to medicine, where he transformed the foxglove digitalis from a folk remedy into a drug that could be reliably and safely used by doctors to treat heart disease. But he had an extremely broad range of interests beyond medicine. This included geology, chemistry, and botany. He was a member of the Lunar Society, where he would have met many of the leading scientific and technological minds at his time. These included people like Erasmus Darwin, Joseph Priestley, James Watt, and Matthew Boulton. But the part of his work that's most relevant here is his flora, and he spent a huge amount of time writing what was a complete list of the plants and fungi and lichens of Britain, as far as he knew. This was quite a pioneering work. It was the first flora to be arranged according to the Linnaean system that was published in English. There had been previous floras, Linnaean floras, but these were all written in Latin, so they were much less accessible than his work. This is an example of one of his descriptions. So he he didn't just skim over the fungi, but gave each one quite a detailed description, which is quite unusual for the time. And although his work wasn't illustrated, he did include references to other works with illustrations of the fungi. So it's possible to cross-reference them and to check that he was thinking of the same fungus as we might do today. This is his description of the parrot waxcap, Agaricus citocinus, and he refers to this excellent plate by Jacob Schaefer, which is part of the original description of the species, and it really does capture the essence of the parrot waxcap pretty well. The other illustration by Batar is maybe slightly less useful, but still interesting to see what he was thinking of. Today, a lot of these works have been scanned and are available online from places like the Biodiversity Heritage Library. So there's a fantastic resource if you want to go and have a look at some of this history. He also refers to many locations in the West Midlands where he's found these particular species. The parrot waxcap he found in Edgbaston Park, which were the grounds of his house on the outskirts, what was then the outskirts of Birmingham. Now it's a golf course, and his former home is the clubhouse of the golf course. So most of it's inaccessible to fungi enthusiasts, but it's still possible to visit the location that he mentions here. They called the Pool Dam, and it's still quite a nice place to find fungi. There are beech trees planted along it, so you can find species like this Tricholoma sciodes associated with beech trees. So this is Louisa, the Countess of Aylford. She was a friend of Withering's, and they shared a common interest in botany. She lived at Packington Hall, which is about halfway between Birmingham and Coventry, and they corresponded, they wrote letters to each other, and Withering lent her some of his botany books so that she could improve her knowledge of botany and mycology. She produced this amazing series of over 2,800 watercolours, which documented all of the plants, lichens and fungi that she could find on her estate at Packington Hall. These were bound together in a series of 27 volumes, but unfortunately a lot of them were sold off in the past. And for many years, the location of the 2 volumes that contained illustrations of fungi was unknown. They were sold at Christie's in 2002, but it wasn't known who the buyer was. But it turns out it was a museum in Qatar. So they now have been digitized, and the images are available to researchers, which is much better than them being in a private collection where they might have been broken up and sold as individual paintings. So moving on to the very first fungus foray in Birmingham. This was organised by the Birmingham Natural History Society and held in Sutton Park, which is one of the best places, still one of the best places to look for fungi in the West Midlands. They invited the mycologist Mordecai Cubbott-Cook to come up from Kew and lead the foray. And it's quite nice to read that some of the things never change. They complained about the dry weather beforehand, leading to a lack of interesting species. But they mentioned that at the end, the party adjourned to a neighbouring establishment with tea and a lecture by Dr. Cook, which sounds delightful. Remarkably, we also have a sketchbook with some paintings done on that first foray. These are in the collection of Birmingham museums, and they were made by a local artist called Oliver Clare. He's best known for his decorative still lives of things like fruit and birds' nests and things like that. But he also produced this little sketchbook of fungi. most of them were made on the first foray, but he also carried on and did a few sketches later on. Unfortunately, he didn't record the names of the fungi, so it can be slightly difficult to work out exactly what he was intending to record in the sketchbooks. But there are some quite pretty ones. All of these have been digitized. All of the images, all the pages of the sketchbooks have been digitized, and they're available on Birmingham Museum's image site, which are called DAMS. So if you look that up and then search for Oliver Clare, you can see images of all of the sketchbook pages. And then moving on to Reginald Buller. You might have heard of Buller's drops. These are the little tiny microscopic drops of fluid that cause basidiospores to be pinged off from basidia. And yeah, Buller did a lot of research on spores and spore discharge, which is why those are named after him. This little illustration is from his collected papers, which he published as researches on fungi. I think there were 6 volumes in total. Again, these are all available on the Biodiversity Heritage Library, and they're well worth having a look at because they still contain lots of interesting information. He was born and grew up in Birmingham, in Moseley, which is a suburb of Birmingham, and he then became a lecturer in botany at the University of Birmingham. He spent most of his life, his research career in Canada, but he would return to Birmingham every summer to visit his family, and he also arranged for to use some of the lab space at the University of Birmingham when he was here. So a lot of his research mentions specimens collected in places like Sutton Park, and features photographs of specimens from the West Midlands. He also had a very nice book plate, and I quite like his motto, personal motto of Carpe Fungum. A friend and colleague of his was William Bywater Grove, who assisted Buller in things like editing his papers. At one point, they planned to produce a guidebook of fungi together, but unfortunately, that project never materialised. But he was an excellent mycologist in his own right, and produced several books on mycology, including this guide to the British rust fungi, and also to the coelomycetes, the stem and leaf fungi. But his most important contribution to the mycology of the West Midlands was writing the chapter on fungi together with the botanist James Eustace Bagenal. This was published in the Flora of Warwickshire, and was the first comprehensive list of the fungi of Warwickshire. So then in the 20th century, we have the Fungus Flora of Warwickshire. This was a project by the Warwickshire Fungus Survey, which was started in 1965. This was the mycological section of the Birmingham Natural History Society, and they worked together for the next 15 years to produce the Fungus Flora of Warwickshire. This was published in 1980 by the British Mycological Society and edited by Malcolm Clark. It contains detailed records of all of the fungi found in Warwickshire, and each species is backed up by at least one voucher specimen that's been kept, and they're looked after by Warwick museums. So moving on to some of the fungal sites of the West Midlands. This is Sutton Park. So there's recently been a flora of Sutton Park published. This was written by members of the Birmingham and Black Country Botanical Society. and includes a chapter on the fungi of the park and a checklist of the fungi written by myself. It's available from all good bookshops and also the publishers, Nature Bureau, who did a brilliant job of producing the book. So this is a map of Sutton Park. It's one of the largest sort of wild or semi-wild sites in the West Midlands. It's about 2,400 acres in extent and contains an interesting mix of habitats. It's a former deer park, which is why it's been preserved, and then later it became common land. Unfortunately, it doesn't contain some of the things you might associate with deer parks, like a large number of ancient oak trees, but nevertheless contains some really nice areas of habitat, particularly sort of dry acid heath, fens, swamps, and things like that you don't find in the rest of the West Midlands. And these are some of the fungi of the park. It's the type locality for the beautiful yellow Russula claro flavour that William Bywater Grove described from specimens there in 1888, and it's still possible to find it in the park, particularly in the wetter areas associated with birch trees. So being so close, being surrounded by quite a large population, unfortunately, it does mean it's quite heavily foraged. So it can be quite difficult to find some of the edible species in the park when the foragers have been around. But it's still possible to find things like the brown birch bolete in some of the more isolated parts of the park. But what makes this Sutton Park really special are areas like the wet woodland. This is a lovely mix of trees like alder, birch and willows with thick carpet of sphagnum moss on the ground. And this is home to a number of quite specialised fungi that you don't really find anywhere else in the region. Things like the beautiful mottled bolete, that kind of varicolour, and this Deceiver Lacaria purpurobadia. Again, as far as I'm aware, this is the only site for this particular species in the West Midlands. Because it's so wet, it can be quite difficult to access the site. So you really have to have just the right conditions. It can't have been too rainy before you try and have a look at this particular area, because you'll end up getting stuck in the mud. It's also home to a large population of fungi like the Liberty caps, and this attracts a different kind of fungus enthusiast to visit the park in the late summer and early autumn. And like many sites, there always seem to be new species being discovered every year. This is a sort of little graph I produced when I was writing the checklist for the park, and it shows the number of species recorded over time. So there's a fairly modest rise from the 1880s up until the 1960s. Then you can really see the impact of the Warwickshire Fungus Survey, adding a huge number of species. And species continue to be added up until the present day. A recent example is this one, Entoloma prunioloides, a fairly large and noticeable entoloma. So it's likely that people had seen it before. It's just no one had actually recorded it from the park. But not all the fungal sites in the West Midlands are as big or impressive as Sutton Park. Some of them can be quite modest. This is the churchyard of St George's Church in Edgbaston. At first, it doesn't look like it might be a place where you'd find interesting fungi. It seems like it's surrounded on all sides by busy roads. It's essentially an oversized roundabout. But if you start to look closely at the grass, you'll see that it is in fact mostly moss, and that's always a good sign that there'll be some interesting fungi around. and sure enough, I've spotted at least 2 different species of earth tongue there. This nice little Otidia species, and the trees, which are a mixture of things like limes, a couple of birches, and some pines, host a nice range of ectomycorrhizal species as well. And this is another perhaps surprising survival. So this is Oak House in West Bromwich. This is a timber frame building dating back to the 1600s. It's now being managed as a museum by Sandwell Council, and is a nice little green enclave in the middle of the houses of West Bromwich. So although now a lot of this is residential, before back in the sort of 18th and 19th century, a lot of this was, the surrounding area was mined, and a lot of heavy industry took place there as well. So it's remarkable that that Oak House has survived. Although it has quite extensive grounds, the really interesting bit is this area outlined in yellow, and it seems to be a relatively unaltered patch of vegetation that has survived, probably without being mucked about too much, since the house was built in the 1600s, and because of that, it has always has an amazing range of fungi in this little area. Every time I've been, I've led a few forays there, and every time I've visited, there's always been an amazing range of fungi. There's another little photograph showing a fly agaric in front of Oak House. So one of my favourite habitats to look for fungi in the West Midlands are road verges. Maybe not what you'd traditionally think of as a good fungal habitat, but it's always worth exploring. This is one of my favourite spots in the middle of 2 lanes of a busy route in and out of Birmingham. This has a nice range of trees growing along the middle of the road, including birches, beech, oak, and hornbeam. All of these are excellent ectomycorrhizal hosts, and as you can imagine, there are lots of fungi that grow with them. Here are a few examples. I've just selected some of the boletes that I found at this particular site. Some of these can grow in quite large numbers, particularly things like bradycans, the rooting bolete, and impolitum, the unchanging or iodine bolete. Slightly less frequent are things like Boletus edulis and Suolellus qualletii, and I've only found species like Chalciporus rubinus once there. So there's quite a lot of variation according to how frequent some of these species are. But this should illustrate that there is an amazing variety of fungi to be found in quite a small area. And this is just a photograph showing a typical little group of fungi next to the road. There are some quite rare species in this area. This is one of the hairy milk caps, Lactarius myerii. It's one of the hairy. It's associated with oak trees, and this, as far as I know, this is the only site for the species in the area, so in the West Midlands. I'm not entirely sure why road verges are so good for fungi, but it's always fun to speculate on the reasons for that. Obviously, not many people tend to walk down the middle of roads, so there's probably a lack of trampling and soil compaction. People also don't walk their dogs there, which means that there is less nitrogen and phosphorus enrichment from dog waste. The grass in this area is cut regularly and not collected, so you might expect that there'd be usual build-up of kind of rotting grass, but that doesn't seem to be the case. And maybe it is that the wind from passing traffic helps to blow the dead grass away, leading to a less nitrogen-enriched environment, which is always good for fungi. So this is I don't know if this is really a type of habitat, but this is a kind of a loose association of sites that I've called ruderal habitats, these sort of waste ground. This photograph, which is the one that I chose as the introduction to my talk, is the southbound platform of Five Ways railway station, just on the edge of central Birmingham. And every year that I've visited in the right time of year, I've spotted these spectacular displays of blackening wax caps. Here are a couple of other photographs of the same sites and a couple of the different species you can find. Another one of the blackening wax caps and this nice little cup fungus as well. And this is a photograph sort of showing a general view of the habitat. You can see that it is consists mostly of mosses on very thin sandy soil with a lot of gravel and rubble underneath. There's only occasional clumps of grasses and even more occasional other flowering plants there. Another species that I've seen in a similar habitat is this bleach cup. These grow underneath a metal fence on an industrial estate where I sometimes work. And they seem to be particularly fond of this kind of dead drip zone underneath the fence, where it's dominated by mosses and some of these ephemeral spring plants as well. And these kind of moss-dominated places are a good place to look for moss-associated fungi. Species like Arenia rickenii often crop up in these type of environments as well. And have a look at some of the grassland habitats of the West Midlands. So this is probably the most famous grassland fungus site in the West Midlands. This is the Lysos in Halesowen. It was notified as a triple SI in 2019, specifically for the outstanding diversity and abundance of its grass and fungi. There are at least 28 species of wax caps recorded from this site, 23 by traditional fruiting body surveys, and the rest by eDNA surveys. And these are some of the species you can find there. Hygrocybe coccinea is fairly common in grasslands across the region, but species like Hygrocybe punicea are pretty much restricted to the Lysos, maybe one or two other places, but they're definitely indicators of really high quality grassland fungi sites. The eDNA surveys did show that there was quite a few species of earth tongues present, but the only one that I've seen fruiting is Geoglossum phalanx. So although most of the grassland sites in the West Midlands are acid to neutral, there are occasional outcrops of calcareous, lime-rich habitats as well. This is Wren's Nest National Nature Reserve. It's a limestone hill that was extensively quarried in the past for lime to use in blast furnaces. But now it's a national nature reserve, mainly for its geological interest. There you can still find abundant fossils there, and it's particularly famous for the trilobite fossils that were called the Dudley bug. It also contains some lovely lime-rich grassland and fungal species associated with that type of habitat, such as Hygrocybe or Acuta conica. And these are some of the rarer wax caps that have turned up in the West Midlands. This beautiful red Gliophorus that I don't think has an official name yet, and the Gliophorus reginae. So I saw this for the first time last autumn in the West Midlands. I was very pleased to see that after spending a long time with the Lost and Found Fungus Project looking for this species. And one of the things when you think of urban fungi are wood chips, and they really are a fabulous habitat in the West Midlands, particularly in the more city centre locations. They can grow in almost any size of bed with wood chip in, and that means you can often find them in front of some of the landmarks of the cities. These are red lead roundheads growing in front of the Library of Birmingham, where you get some of the larger wood chip beds. This is the middle of a Five Ways Island. You can get some spectacularly huge groups of fungi, like these amazing display of Parasola conopilus. And another of the common species in the wood chip of the West Midlands are the powerfully hallucinogenic psilocybe cyanescens, or wavy caps, or blue leg brownies. They crop up in almost all of the wood chip beds fairly regularly, and also occasionally in other habitats as well. These are some of the most beautiful fungi that you can find in the wood chips. The lovely verdigris agaric Stropharia ruginosa and Stropharia cerulean. This particular specimen's in front of the old Curzon Street station, which is where they're currently building their new HS2 terminal. And later in the winter, you can find species like the bluet. And if you're lucky in spring and you find a nice newly laid area of wood chip, you can find things like the morel, Morchellulata. But these tend only to appear for 1 year, and if you try and look in the same place in subsequent years, they almost never appear in the same place twice. Sometimes very unexpected fungi will turn up. This is perhaps the most surprising find of recent years, the coral tooth Hericium coralloides. The other two Hericium species do crop up reasonably regularly in the West Midlands every few years or so, but I was never expecting to find a coral tooth in this particular area. I was alerted to its presence by a post on iNaturalist, and at first I didn't quite believe it, so I wrote a little message saying, are you sure this is the right location? And yeah, the finder was adamant that it was in this fairly ordinary looking park in Birmingham. So of course I had to go and check it out for myself, and sure enough, on the broken end of a fallen tree was this amazing fruiting body of the coral tooth in pretty much perfect condition. So you never really can predict what species you can find. And this is maybe slightly less spectacular, but still interesting. This is Gamundia xerophila, a fairly small brown fungus, but it seems to grow on the dog lichen peltigerous species. And I've only ever found this on one site in the West Midlands on the Rowley Hills. And this is another beautiful species that I found in only one location. This is the lovely Cortinarius phlegmatium pseudodolnoye. This is a species that's associated with hornbeam, and although hornbeam seems to be quite a common tree planted in parks and other ornamental plantings, I've only found this associated with one little group of hornbeams. So it doesn't seem to be more widespread than that. And yeah, so a little bit about the West Midlands fungus group. This initially started as just a Facebook group in 2021. I've been thinking about starting a fungus group for a while. I've been asked to run various forays around the region for all sorts of different organisations. So in places like the Jewellery Quarter cemeteries and Oak House, as I mentioned earlier. Then yeah, I was given a little bit of extra encouragement by Janet Antrobus, who's a long-time member of the Warwickshire Fungus Survey. So initially, I just started a Facebook group for people in the region to kind of share their finds and any interesting and ask for help in identifying fungi that they've found as well. It grew quite quickly. We now have more than 500 members of the Facebook group and others as well who aren't on Facebook. And this is a photograph of our very first foray. In 2022, we became associated with the British Mycological Society and had our first sort of full foray season. The process of becoming affiliated was pretty straightforward, and yeah, Norman in the BMS office was very helpful setting that up. Yeah, like I say, this is a photograph of our first foray that we held jointly with the Warwickshire Fungus Group. This was in Sutton Park, of course. So there are both advantages and disadvantages to running a fungus group in an area like the West Midlands. There are definitely fewer areas of really top quality fungus habitat, but hopefully, as I've shown from some of my examples previously, there are still plenty of interesting sites to choose from. The high population density means that there is a large pool of potential members. This means our forays are usually very well attended, and the people who come along cover a broad range of ages and backgrounds. Another advantage of running forays in urban areas is that almost all of our, as far as I'm aware, all of our sites are accessible by public transport, meaning that people without cars can take part. The rural areas where tend to have awful public transport, particularly on the weekends when most forays are held. So overall, it's been a really great experience starting the fungus group. Got to meet a whole bunch of really interesting people, and it's also encouraged me to look for fungi in places that I would not have done otherwise. Yeah, that's pretty much all of my slides. So in conclusion, to sum up, even the most urbanized areas can have a rich and interesting mycological history. They can contain a diverse range of fungi habitats, both the sort of classical habitats like grassland, but also some of the more unexpected ones like road verges. Yeah, running fungal forays in urban areas is a great way to make mycology accessible to a wide audience. So thank you for listening, and these are the contact details for West Midlands Fungus Group, and if you want to have a look at any more of my photos, I've put them up on Flickr. They're all Creative Commons, so feel free to reuse them if you want. And yeah, so I'll end there.
Thank you, Lucas. That was really interesting, and your photographs are just amazing. Thank you.
Thank you.
It's always a joy. I follow you on X, not allowed to call it Twitter anymore, and
It's always Twitter to me.
yeah, and check in on Facebook, and it's always lovely to see your photographs there. So thank you for that. We've got quite a lot of questions coming in. So I've also got a few, but I'll hold off on asking them. So the first one from Gary Easton is about how many members do you have on Forays, given that you've got such a large following on Facebook? I'd be horrified at 536 people turning up for a foray.
Yeah, fortunately, we never have quite so many fungi on the forays. So yeah, it varies between sort of around sort of 10 to 20, so still kind of manageable numbers. I think anything really over about 25 and it starts to become a bit too difficult to manage unless you've got sort of joint leaders of forays and things like that.
Yeah, and you're quite a new group, so do you anticipate the numbers, what we call our core membership, who are the ones who do come on the forays? Do you anticipate that growing?
I think so. A lot of people just come along to one or two a season. The people who come to sort of most of them or everyone is relatively small, probably only about sort of 5 to 10. Yeah, but hopefully that we'll get a sort of regular core of people going to most of them.
And Sarah's asking, what are your favourite finds in the West Midlands?
Oh, so far, I mean, the coral tooth was pretty spectacular. I always like yeah, finding fungi in unusual places. That's always a good one. Seeing things like oyster mushrooms growing from old chipboard and things like that. Always impressed by the resilience of fungi, and yeah, finding things like oyster like the pavement mushrooms as well, bursting up through the through the asphalt. Always fun. And yeah, so things like the ballerina wax cap and things like that are always lovely to see.
Yeah, we'll come back to Liso's because that was a fantastic announcement of it being notified as a sign. We'll come back to that. I've got a question about that, but we'll keep going with the ones on the chat. So James asks, do you undertake forays in all the places you mentioned, or does it just depend on season or whatever? How do you arrange your forays in the region?
So yeah, I mean, we tend to obviously we've only been doing sort of 2 years so far. So yeah, we've often gone to revisited quite a few of the locations. So obviously, once you get to know that somewhere has a reliable range of fungi, it's always nice to go back there and revisit. Try to make it so that the geographical spread is reasonably even across the region. It was quite tempting to have them all near where I live, but yeah, try to spread it out a bit. So that's definitely one of the factors. And yeah, so try to have a mixture of the sort of reliable sites. So I think we're probably almost certainly going to go to Sutton Park every year from now onwards. But then yeah, mix it up between the reliable sites that I know have good species and new places that you haven't visited before.
Yeah, I think that's the key, isn't it? Roy asks, have you ever used DNA sequencing for identifying really difficult species?
We haven't got the facilities in the group yet. I did send off some specimens for the European Mycoblitz, but I don't think we've got the results back from that yet. Yeah. So yeah, not regularly, but it's definitely something that I'd like to explore more of. And yeah, because I know the Warwickshire group have now setting up fungal sequencing, and they do that fairly regularly, and they've made a lot of interesting discoveries there. So it's definitely something that's worth exploring.
Yeah, I think it's something that appeals to many people. One of the questions also relates to DNA, but the eDNA work that was done at Midlands. And could you tell us a little bit more about that? Who did it, and how did it work to help notify the SSSI?
Yeah, so that was done by Gareth Griffiths from the Aberystwyth University. He's one of the foremost wax cap experts, and has a lot of experience with eDNA service sequencing. Yeah, that was actually paid for as part of the site. Was being used by Severn Trent. So they were digging up some of the site. So as part of the mitigation for that, they paid for the DNA sequencing, and that enabled the actual site to get over the threshold for notification. So without that, it probably wouldn't have been able to be notified as a triple SI. So it definitely made a difference, because yeah, it'd been surveyed for probably about 20 years, and yeah, I guess some species just are very shy about fruiting, or it's very easy to overlook if they only appear for a short amount of time.
Yeah. And do you go back to LISO? Is that how you pronounce it? I'm probably pronouncing it completely wrongly.
Yeah, LISOs. Yeah, I think
LISOs. Do you go back and survey there regularly? Is there a connection between now it's notified? Do you provide records on a regular basis, or is there ongoing survey there?
Unfortunately, the mycologist Nick Williams, he did a lot of the survey work for the LISOs. He's passed away recently, so he was the person who lived very close by, sort of within a few minutes walk of the site, and did most of the grass and fungi surveying. Yeah, when we do visit, we tend to do it with the wardens of the site, and yeah, obviously send them the records afterwards. But yeah, it tends to be that particularly for the public forays, it's more about kind of teaching people what the different species are, rather than doing sort of more systematic surveying. So yeah,
Right,
yeah.
Yeah, that's great. More questions. Let me just see, catching up with them. Roy says he's surprised you haven't mentioned Cannock Chase.
That's a little bit outside of the West Midlands, so that's just beyond the border. That's fully in Staffordshire. It's a great place, but just sort of outside of this particular region.
Are you ever tempted?
Oh yeah, it's great to visit, but yes, just kind of restricted the scope for this particular talk.
And then Matt Gale asks, he's been developing research looking at native species for mycoremediation of urban soils. Do you have any recommendations for species that might be particularly useful? And do you know if anyone else is looking at this?
I mean, the classic one is the oyster fungus. That seems to be the one that's able to live off almost anything, including, like I mentioned, things like treated woods, chipboard, petrochemical contaminated soils. So yeah, and what you can also do is sort of almost like train them to specific chemicals. So if you grow them on sort of increasing concentrations of a substrate, they can kind of change the composition of their enzymes to fit in better with that. I mean, most of the fungi that grow on wood chips are non-native, or a lot of them are. So that's kind of interesting in a way. But they're examples of fungi that are quite adaptable. They're often quite competitive with other species as well, and tend to grow very quickly. But yeah, if you're prepared to kind of relax the requirement for native species, it's well worth exploring some of the species that you do find on wood chips, because they're likely to be fairly good, able to tolerate fairly harsh conditions.
Question from Martin, which you may or may not want to answer, because it sounds very mysterious, but what is an interesting find that you found at the JQ cemetery?
The jewellery quarter cemeteries. It's a particularly good site for the ink stain boletes. They seem to love cemeteries and graveyards. I found them in a few different places in the West Midlands, but only apparently in cemeteries and graveyards. Also found ruby boletes there, but they're a fairly unusual find. Yeah, it's definitely an interesting place worth looking at, and of course, weeping widows, as it's a cemetery.
Sure, there must be some other cemetery related ones there as well.
Yeah, Dead Man's Fingers.
Maybe
I've
that should
actually found those there.
Steve asked, do you use the CHEGD, the CHEGD scoring system for grassland fungi?
Yeah, when I find a kind of potentially interesting site, for a lot of them, I haven't actually done enough survey work to sort of fully score them. But yeah, it's definitely yeah, for those sites that do look interesting. Yeah, I'll kind of start to make a more detailed list of some of them. So, for example, the church in Edgbaston, I've only managed to visit it a couple of times, so it's not really been enough to build up a sort of detailed picture of what's there.
Yeah. And Martin asks, and I think you might have already answered this, but when it comes to DNA sequencing, when you send samples for sequencing?
Yeah, because so far I've only done it as part of the European microblitz that was last year. So those ended up going to the United States in the end, via a company called Mycopunks. But yeah, I don't really regularly send any specimens for DNA sequencing.
Yeah, okay, thank you. I've got a couple of questions as well. So I thought it was really nice that you started with the historical aspects, and to have that kind of written history going back to 1881 was fantastic. And I guess, you know, and for me, it was interesting to hear about the type locality for Russula clariflava, because russulas are my thing. But I was quite intrigued at you saying that wet woodland area within Sutton Park is a really unusual habitat in your region. I'm an East Midlander, and we've got lots of wet sites in the East Midlands. So what do you think is going on there? Is that just historical loss, or is there something else that's taken those, prevented those wet sites from developing?
Yeah, I think it is just most of the wet woodlands have been kind of either dug up or cut down or developed in some other way. A lot of the water courses have been historically used for power, so a lot of them, mills and things, were built along them. Industries, particularly around Birmingham, so use the water to power them. So I think there's just been so much development of pretty much all other water courses, that there's just been none of the. I mean, I'm sure back, if you go back sort of 500 to 1,000 years, there'd have been much more here. But yeah, there's very few sort of natural water courses left in the region. So it's only in kind of these protected pockets like Sutton Park that type of woodland can survive.
It's quite interesting. I wonder if the local biodiversity plan has any plans for sort of recreating some of those habitats.
Yeah, it'd be
In
interesting.
our region, they're really incredible habitats, usually lots of interesting stuff in them. So yeah, that would be quite interesting. Another question, David's asked, well, he's asked, can I talk about fungi of the Lickey Hills? But I assume he means, can you talk about fungi of the Lickey Hills?
Yeah, it's another good site again, sort of just slightly to the south of the borders of the West Midlands. yeah, it contains a really nice range of species. There's some lovely woodlands that have like lots of ectomycorrhizal species in them, and also sort of more heathy areas as well. So it's definitely a good place to go and find an interesting range of species. But it's not really a site that I tend to visit that often, so I'm not intimately familiar with the fungi of the area.
Right. James asked, what time of the year is Sutton Park the best time for the most interesting species?
So it's very much dependent on the weather. So for example, last year we had the very wet summer, and that caused a lot of fungi to fruit quite early. So that was sort of in August, but that's fairly unusual. So back when we had the really hot weather in, was it 2022? Yeah, you wouldn't have found any fungi in really any sort of macrofungi in August at all. So it is really weather dependent. So what you kind of have to do is just keep an eye on the rainfall, and as soon as the ground gets nice and wet, then it's the trigger to start going out and looking for fungi. We've been quite lucky in the fact that we haven't really had an extra dry autumn for a while, but they do happen sometimes, and then you just don't really find many fungi at all for a whole season, which can be very disappointing. But yeah, so broadly, it's autumn, sort of from sort of end of August, beginning of September onwards to really the first frost. As soon as it starts getting really icy and frosty, most fungi are 90% water, so that tends to destroy most of the larger ones anyway.
Yeah, thanks for that. I was intrigued by road verges because I think I'm based in Aberdeen, and we obviously have some commonality between Aberdeen and Birmingham because some of our road verges are fantastic. And you have to watch yourself while you're driving around, particularly little islands where the only thing that's on them is a few rabbits and some interesting trees, and all of a sudden you spot something big and you're like, oh. But what I wanted to ask around road verges was, do you kind of have any inkling as to whether they might benefit from particular management, or is the ongoing management just pretty good for fungi?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's not really done with any sort of consideration for them. They just kind of moan regularly. The only thing that you might do is kind of pause mowing during the peak of the fungus season if you wanted to just, sometimes a really nice group of them is is mown away in sort of September, and I'm always disappointed by that. So yeah, you might sort of kind of stop it during the real height of the fungus season, but apart from that, yeah, just regular mowing seems to be beneficial to them. And yeah, like I said, it's interesting that you don't really get the same kind of build up of dead grasses as you do in the in other areas, and that means that the general feeling is of a fairly low nutrient environment, which is yeah, fairly unusual. And yeah, even if you walk around a park sort of on the other side of the road, there are far fewer fungi. But yeah, that's probably because of the things like the sort of trampling and soil compaction and things like that.
Yeah, not thought about that before. It is interesting. The only people compacting these areas are mycologists.
Yeah, exactly.
Um,
Occasionally, a person
I-
wondering if you're okay.
One last question for me. You talked about high density of people in these areas, and so I guess we sometimes on our forays will have people stop and have a look because we're carrying fungi around and they're interested. But some of the sites you go to must have lots of people on them. What's your public interaction like? Is it very positive, and are people interested in what you're doing?
Occasionally we get people turn up, sort of, just asking what we're doing, but hasn't actually happened that often, which is maybe a bit surprising. I think people just kind of steer clear and yeah, maybe wonder what this strange group of people are, but Yeah, I haven't had a huge number of people sort of asking questions about what we're doing. Yeah, sometimes we will do sort of public events at places like Oak House, and there the goal is to sort of interact with the people who are visiting the sites. And in that case, we'll kind of be more proactive in sort of approaching people and going, look at the interesting fungi that we found. But yeah, unless we do that kind of thing, people tend to keep their distance.
Okay, I think we've run out of questions. So, and I mean, I could keep chatting to you for ages, Lucas, but probably people want to get away, and you probably do as well. That was an excellent talk. Thank you so much. It's really fascinating to see different patches and what people are doing in different parts of the country. So thank you so much for talking to us tonight. And yeah, I'll be looking at the Facebook page from now on. I hadn't cottoned on to that, so I will do. And you're getting lots of thanks from people. So thank you very much. And I'd like to thank everyone for joining us this evening. Thank you for your questions. I hope I covered everything. And please do join us for the next BMS evening talk. Check the website out or social media to find out what's happening. And hopefully we'll see you at future talks. So thanks very much, Lucas.
Yes, bye.
Thank you. Bye.